question is, what are some mistakes that people make that they should avoid with regard to their estate plans and pets?
You know, the first thing I think that as we met pet owners at the dog show, the first thing is that most of them said they had it covered. They have it taken care of. And we said, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a good
What do you mean by
point.
that? They said, well, my kids will take care of my dog. And the kids in some cases were standing right behind them and they're shaking their heads and going, no, 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 not me. So, you know, it's kind of like estate planning in general. People assume that it's done because they've signed this thing or signed that. In those cases, they hadn't signed a thing, and there are no care instructions for anybody, and they just assume blindly that it's being taken care of. So I think the first major mistake people make is not really doing proper planning, just assuming that things will work out because people know that they have a pet and there's a family there. Now, in many cases, it's true, maybe even most cases with large families, that someone will step up and take care of the animal. But some animals aren't so easy to take care of. And some people need instructions. And just imagine somebody came into your home and you have maybe a couple of dogs and they don't know which one's which. They don't know how to identify them. They're on different meds. Dogs have different habits. So one of the things we decided to do in the book was include in the appendix a fill-in care instruction sheet. So you could actually, per animal, indicate, what kind of an animal is it, what are the habits, likes, dislikes. If the animal gets anxious, what do you use to calm them down, what kinds of words or strokes help. Bedtime habits, eating habits, vets, where are the vet records. So if somebody has to step into your life and take care of the animal, they've got a chance that they're going to do it the way you would. That's really important. So that would be the second thing, not providing care instructions. Another mistake I think people make, even when they do the planning, from what we've seen in the cases, they neglect planning for disability. They assume that if they put a line in their will, they're covered. And in fact, what happens if they're in an accident, as we said earlier, or what happens if they get very sick and they have an operation and it takes longer than that outpatient surgery, which we know definition of minor surgery is surgery on somebody else, right? There's always something that can happen. And we had a case recently where a woman disappeared, presumed suicide, and nobody attended to the pets. There were 2 gorgeous cats at home, and maybe 7 days later, someone went into the residence and they found these cats, which were more than stressed. They were crazed. No food, no water. So we think a wallet card's an important thing to have. So people need to plan not only for what happens in the event of death, which might be the will provision, what happens in the event of disability or some unanticipated circumstance. The next thing I think that people probably plan for is, if they're planning on the money side, they plan based on current expenses. They don't think about not only inflation, but they don't think about those unanticipated medical bills that will mount up over time as the animal ages. So it's important when you're budgeting to plan for the right amount. Now, we're not going to be like Leona Helmsley with her, I think it was $12 million actually, that she put into the pet trust, but you have to plan a reasonable amount. And we've seen some court cases where the court actually looks at the particular kind of animal, life expectancy, and back the amount down to an appropriate amount. Courts in every state have the ability to do that if the amount's excessive.
Is it common, because I'm thinking of, again, my experience with dogs, but it's almost like a curve. As the dog gets older, the expenses are going to rise because of the fact that there are often more needs for special foods, diet, vet bills, and so a puppy, a dog, 2 to 5 years, very little in the way of expenses, and maybe 2 or 3 good, and it depends on the breed. I mean, certain breeds have longevity, and I've learned over the years that the larger the breed, the shorter the lifespan, believe it or not. And like Great Danes live only 8 or 9 years.
I think if a person asked their vet, they give them an idea of what to anticipate. And Betty Carey had this problem with her German Shepherd that he became allergic, or she became allergic. And she had, in order to start the treatment, to determine what the allergies were, which meant put the dog on ostrich meat. And that, ostrich meat's not cheap. So you got to be on ostrich meat for a period of time to then start introducing other foods. It turns out the dog's allergic to just about everything. So now he needs the weekly, or she needs the weekly shots. So ask the vet or research online as to how these care expenses can mount up, but anticipate them. So another mistake is basing the budget on the current levels instead of the anticipated future increases. Another one is maybe not being serious enough about your choice of who the caregiver is going to be.
Well, how do you get to that? I mean, it's like, let's say, people are coming to you for an estate plan. First question is, how often does the issue of pets come up? It must be something you raise, because, until you and I talked about this and did this show, I never thought about it. It might be a line in a will saying, in the event of my death, I want my dog Fluffy to go to so-and-so, but other than that.
Right.
You never think of this, so this is a whole
Well,
new
it's something
area.
that we're raising now in every case. Do you have any pets? And then if so, should we talk about planning for the pets? And
And what
it's
is the
not
res-
every case that people will want to do it. In some cases, we had one client who said, I'd like the pet to be given to the vet, to be adopted out, and if the pet isn't adopted out in 2 months, I want the pet euthanized. Well, some people will do that rather than, they know the pet, they know what they want. Now that's up to them. I can't say, I can't criticize what they want to do. But more often, if they want to do some planning, they want to do the proper kind of planning, and if the animal has special needs, they want someone who might not be their children. I mean, if they have purebred animals, they have perhaps friends. In some cases, by the way, that under the contract with the breeder, the dog will go back to the breeder. I don't know how they monitor that, but we met a number of breeders at the dog show and said that's in our contract. They wouldn't even want another family member to take it unless they've checked on them.
Does that matter whether or not the dog's been neutered? Because again, if it's a show dog, it's one thing, but often they'll sell a dog as a pet, and the dog, part of the agreement with the breeder is you have it neutered. So would they still take it back in that situation?
I'm
or
not sure. I think that they're looking for the welfare of the pet. It may be, they didn't mention anything about that to me, and I think it's basically before they sold that dog to the purchaser, they got some representations about the kind of lifestyle they have. Are they going to be traveling a lot? Are they somebody going to be home all day and things like that? And they don't just want it to go to a son or daughter in the event of the death of that person. No. Whether that works out in reality, I don't know. But finding the right caregiver, which means not just a casual conversation. And then I think even more important than that, because we can all believe we have the right person, is backup. What if that person doesn't survive you? What if they become disabled later? What if they die later? They survive you, but they die. And it's going to be more important depending on the life expectancy of the animal. Parrots, 50 to 100 years. Got a lot of planning to do.
What are the most unusual requests you've had in some of the estate plans with regard to pets?
Basically, I think that they haven't been unusual. They've been basically to set aside a certain amount of money that the person has budgeted in their own mind and then have the care instructions in place and the right people as successors.
Typically, how much money do you recommend?
I don't. I think they know the pets and they've got to come up with a budget. And it's going to vary, depending on life expectancy, depending on what it takes. In the book, we've got a sample computation showing you based on the care expenses for a parrot, and parrot may have certain annual expenses, but every so many years you have to replace the cage because they're pretty rough on their cages. So you get a sense of what it's going to be, and then you figure out what the extraordinary expenses might be. Mrs. Helmsley put too much into her trust, but as it turns out, here's what it's actually costing every year. Her caregiver, who's a hotel manager, gets $60,000 a year for that. I don't even know if he actually walks the dog himself, but he gets $60,000. I think they said it was about $1,500, $1,800 a year for food, maybe $6,000 to $8,000 for grooming, and my guess is the groomer comes to them. They don't take the dog to the groomer.
I'm sure.
You mentioned $100,000 a year. That's for 24-hour security because there have been death threats against the dog, and then there's a reserve in
Why
there.
have there been death? Because
people are
hated
incensed.
her?
People are angry, I think, and I don't know how many threats there were, but at some point, according to the press, there were reports that people were angry about the amount of money going into the trust. They thought it was ridiculous. But you don't have to be Helmsley to realize that there's expenses to take care of a pet, and maybe the caregiver won't get anything. But still, there's some range that's reasonable, and our clients have kind of figured that out.
So how often, in your estate planning practice, how frequently do you do these? Is it?
Oh, it's not a weekly thing. First of all, we don't have that many clients with pets, but now what we're doing, since we became more aware of it, we're asking everybody. And more often than not, they're saying that they do have a pet. And particularly if they're an older person, they want to make arrangements. If it's a young family, in their 40s and they've got 3 kids in their teens, they're going to assume the kids are going to take care of the pet. But the people who really need to think about this, I think, are the older ones who live alone with their pets. And their pet is their life, and there's nobody else in their life to take care of the pet. The person who has a pet with special needs, if that pet has got all these vet concerns, somebody's got to know what the meds are, which pet is which. Sometimes they have multiple animals in the home. They have to know who the vet is, where the records are in case something happens to the house. Perhaps records should be stored off-site. Perhaps they should have chips on the pets to identify them. Okay, so those people who have pets with extremely long life expectancies, like the lady with the parrot, she realized this parrot has a 50-year life expectancy, and she's 50 herself. So people, and parrots are very difficult animals to care for. You can't just assume. In fact, Betty Carey, my co-author, tells the story of a friend who simply put a note on her fridge, "My parrot goes to so-and-so." No care instructions, no funding, no nothing. The person took the parrot after she passed away and was unable to care for it. Eventually went back to the pet store, and it was sold to someone else.
Yeah, I think a lot of parrots can be very, very difficult animals, so that makes sense. Robert Cass, we've reached another break point. We'll be right back with my guest as we discuss issues with regard to estate planning for pets right after this break.